Hey everyone, this is Jen and you're watching BPD Woman. In today's video, we're going to talk about and deconstruct the myths of borderline personality disorder. How many times have you heard something negative? How many times have you read something nasty about somebody with BPD? How often do you hear those of BPD just totally whittled down to some of their symptoms and that's it, like they're not even a person at all? Well, today's video, we're going to talk all about that. My name's Jen and you're watching BPD Woman. On this channel, if you have BPD, CPTSD, or a highly sensitive person, you are in the right place and you will find positive solution-based approaches to recovery. My goal is to help you achieve your goals, sharing my insight, experience, and the nuances that I've learned through therapy and actually applying these skills over the last 20 years of my recovery. I've lived with borderline for about 30 years and I was diagnosed back in 2001. Since that time, I've done multiple rounds of DBT, workbooks, one-on-one, group therapy, research. I read the books. I have a YouTube channel. Get it. I'm pretty committed. And while I am not a therapist or a psychologist, I do answer one question that none of those folks can, which is, what's it like to have BPD? And in doing so, I can share with you the nuances and my insight and experience that your psychologist cannot. Although I do highly recommend you obtain a psychologist, especially one that is trained in DBT and personality disorders. If that all sounds good to you, let's get going. In today's video, I'm going to teach you where you could be looking for positive and informative information on borderline. I'm gonna tell you where you should avoid looking for information. I'm going to highlight some of the biggest myths about BPD, and then I'm gonna break those down with some facts. I'm gonna briefly talk about why those myths are perpetuated, and then I'm gonna give you some tips on how you can combat those myths if they come up to you. Let's get going. The first thing that I want to highlight here is that you are a person. You are not BPD. You are not just a series of symptoms. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You just have maladaptive patterns that you didn't choose to obtain through years of trauma and abuse, decades actually. And so you might, in your quest to search out information about your disorder, your diagnosis, you may go to lots of places on the internet, lots of forums, and I'm lucky. When I was diagnosed 20 years ago, the internet really hadn't blown up like the way it has today. And so, we had books. You had to go to the bookstore and get a book. And that was actually helpful because there weren't all these forums. Borderline wasn't really talked about in a huge way. There wasn't a lot of information out there, and that actually was a good thing because you had to go to specific sources of information if you wanted to learn about your disorder. Now you have Quora, you have Reddit, you have Facebook, you have YouTube, you have Google, you have all of these different forums where you can search for information. And I want to tell you that most of the information out there is written by people that are either angry, not a professional. You can often find that they're angry, that they're maybe scorned, maybe they've had a bad experience with somebody with BPD. And so in a place to vent, you can find a lot of this diatribe and a really unhelpful information. And so first I want to say where to not get info. Well, do not look for reliable info on places like Quora or Reddit or Google, chat sites or forums. You really want to make sure that you are going to forums and videos, and there are some great ones out there that are state sponsored, or NIH or Healthline or psychologytoday.com. I cannot give enough mad props to psychologytoday.com's wealth of information and articles on their website. Go check them out. Stay off of definitely Reddit. Anybody can answer any question on Reddit, even if they're not a expert of any sort. So where to get info then? Well, like I said, going to places like NIH or your local or state health departments, going to sources of places of books written by psychologists, Loving with Somebody with Personality Disorder by Dr. Sherry Manning, Dr. Daniel Fox's books are pretty good. Your DBT courses. And, you really want to narrow down the information, and you want to make sure that it's reliable information, because otherwise you're going to start to sort of spin yourself up and go down rabbit holes that really won't be helpful. So now that we've gotten where to look for information and where not to look for information, let's get going in the greatest myths of BPD. The first myth of BPD is they never get better. So just steer clear, because once a BPD, always a BPD. Ooh, debunk time. BPD is actually one of the highest recovery, has the highest recovery rate of people that move on to develop more adaptive, effective patterns of behavior. Keep in mind, BPD is a personality disorder, not a mood disorder. What does that mean? It means that there's nothing chemical in the brain that's going on. It can't be treated with medicine. Symptoms can be alleviated with medicine, like anxiety meds or antidepressants. However, BPD and most personality disorders are recovered by lengthy DBT courses, by behavior modification, by assessing patterns of behavior, by reframing thoughts. And it has, again, one of the highest recovery rates, where people tend to go on to marriages, healthy relationships, more stable lives, especially in their late 30s, early 40s. So the idea that someone with BPD will never get better is simply a falsehood. In fact, if you have BPD, congratulations, because you have one of the most treatable, well-diagnosed, well-versed, and a personality disorder with the only true modality of treatment, DBT, up your sleeve. Let's go to myth number 2. Myth number 2, they are manipulative. They are conniving. Watch your back. They are out for blood, right? This is a big one. I hear this all the time. BPDs, they're manipulative. They're manipulative. They know what they're doing. The truth is that, sure, to a certain degree, we all have some manipulation, right? We all might say things or do things in the hopes of tipping at an outcome. That doesn't mean you have a personality disorder. I think where this idea that people with BPD are manipulative comes in is that people with BPD have emotional ability, which means their moods fluctuate very quickly. They can be impulsive, right? They could say, I'm never going to get married, and then 2 months later they could be married. They have low self-esteem. They tend to self-harm. And so when you put in all of these components into a pot and you stir it up to a person that could really look like, hey, they're manipulating me. Hey, they said they're going to cut themselves and they're only doing that to trap me in a relationship. Maybe. But that doesn't mean all the times I said, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to kill myself. Those were real moments where I felt so low that I wanted that emotional suffering to end. And that wasn't a way to manipulate someone. That was a way to communicate to someone. So sure, of course, people can be manipulative and certain behaviors might look manipulative, but I really don't believe at the heart of BPD that when people are acting out or they're crying or they're emotional, for instance, like I would have these crying spells and my ex-boyfriend told me that I was doing it on purpose to make him feel bad or something like that. Well, sorry, you're not that important, buddy. I actually was sad because I was sad. So debunk number 2. Let's go to number 3. People with BPD, they're just doing this on purpose. This is all just some act. Gosh, I wish it was. I wish it was, and I would have to spend all this money and all this time trying to recover. The very fact is that, especially early on in BPD recovery, those with BPD have a pretty low self-awareness rate, right? They're not really sure of what they're doing. They're coming out of traumatic environments, especially in my 20s. I was like, right? It was a whirlwind. I was drinking, I was smoking, I was engaging in different kinds of behaviors that weren't healthy. And so I'm sure somebody could just be like, well, if she would just stop drinking, she would be fine. Well, if she would just stop cutting, like her problems would be over. If she just stopped going from one relationship to the next, she's just doing this on purpose to get attention. The truth is that the level of self-awareness that would have to go into doing something on purpose is just not present in someone who's really starting to recover from BPD. In fact, they don't know what they're feeling a lot of the time. You know, this is sort of some of the very basics and core components of a DBT, recognizing what your emotions are, right? How many times were we asked, what are you feeling? And it was anger. Okay, now if you ask me what I'm feeling, I could be like, well, I feel shame, I feel tired, I feel disappointment, right? It's not just anger. So I just don't believe there's enough self-awareness that there could be an intent behind it. And even if there was an intent behind it, of course, I'm sure there are instances of that. What is the end game for that person dealing with that on purposeness, right? I mean, do you think that they want to suffer 24/7? Not generally. Let's go to number 4. Myth number 4, those with BPD are so needy. Well, there's a little bit of truth to this, isn't there? Now, I think that the term needy implies that, again, it's like this intentional on purpose thing that those with BPD just simply can't control themselves. The thing is that emotionally speaking, they haven't been able to trust themselves for a really long time. They have been totally invalidated in their environments. They're not sure what they feel. They're not sure what they want. Sometimes they don't even know what their favorite things are in life. And so they might seek out others or groups or relationships to help define that, right? And they find it very hard to sit with themselves and to figure out, okay, what is it that I'm actually feeling and what is it that I actually need? And so the opposite of that, trying to grab at things that you want to know, what am I, who am I, that can come across as very needy. And that, you know, could be a collection of boyfriends or job hoppings or lots of constant, you know, crying spells or crisis calls or phone calls that you may put on. So I understand where that myth comes from, but it doesn't mean that they're doing it, again, on purpose. I think a lot of these myths are based on intent, and it's just simply not there. Let's go to number 5. Those with BPD are crazy. No, we're not crazy. We're just emotionally dysregulated, and we have not been given the skills in life yet to regulate those emotions. And so if you think of a child, a young child, 5, 4, 3, who doesn't have the language or the feeling to know what they want and to articulate what they're feeling and what their desires are, you could say that that child is acting crazy, right? That they're just out of control, throwing a temper tantrum. Why aren't they just using their words, right? To put on a lot of expectations to a child of that age to act adult and communicative and emotionally regulated is a tall order. And I'm not saying that those with borderline are children. I am saying that their emotional development has been stunted to a certain level. And the idea of emotional ability and controlling their emotions is not something that's come intrinsically, and it will take years and usually decades to really grab a hold of. So then there's the drinking, and then there's the cutting. And this looks like somebody who's out of control. And I do think that's a fair statement, that they're out of control. Crazy is pejorative. Crazy invokes negativity. Crazy involves a label. There's nothing helpful about calling someone crazy. Let's go to the next myth. Oh, they're just feigning that they're going to kill themselves. They won't actually kill themselves. Ooh, well, this is a big one. 10% of those with BPD will actually commit and complete a suicide. That is one of the highest numbers of all mental illnesses after bipolar disorder. 10%. That's a lot. 1 in 10. That's a huge amount, okay? So the thing with borderline is that when you already take something like cutting or drug abuse, something that's already dangerous speaking, and then you put on impulsivity, and then you may put in a aggravating factor like an argument or a job loss or something like a pandemic, that can really push someone to be more emotionally dysregulated. And the more that someone says, you're not going to do it, you're just doing this to get attention, the more that they may actually be pushed to do it. You know, I have cut myself and not, like here's the scar right here. I don't know if you can see that, right? So I just did that once to, I wouldn't want my boyfriend to go. I was like, don't go. And I just thought I would cut myself with a piece of glass. I ended up needing about 10 stitches. And so sometimes throughout this impulsivity, or when people will hurt themselves, sometimes they can actually hurt themselves more than they intended. So if someone is saying to you, I'm going to hurt myself, or I'm serious about hurting myself, take that shit seriously. That is not a joke. Let's go to the next one. Those with borderline are so vindictive. Well, newsflash, you don't have to have borderline to be vindictive. You could just be scorned or angry or cheated on or have a loss, or, I'm not saying that being vindictive is going to make you feel better. I mean, anytime you're thinking about acting out or being vindictive, I want you to think about what that's going to make you feel like in the end. Oftentimes, when you act out on that anger, it's you that ends up feeling bad about it in the end. So being vindictive is not necessarily a component of borderline, but it is a component of somebody who's really angry and out for blood. Have you been at the behest or the other end of someone's ire? Right? It doesn't mean that it's simply just attached to BPD. I think that it gets blown up into BPD because with our anger and our impulsivity, it can get more elevated, right? Where somebody may be vindictive without BPD on a 3, we may take that up to a 7 or an 8. Let's go to the next myth. Borderlines are the same as narcs or narcissists. Well, if that was true, then we wouldn't have 2 different personality disorders, borderline and narcissism, would we? So this idea gets thrown out a lot. Narcissistic abuse is the same as borderline abuse. And I've done a few videos on the differences and why those with BPD get attached to NPD. NPDs have a very grandiose sense of self. They seek transactions. They see relationships as what it can be done for them, where those with BPD are really enmeshed with love and emotion, and they want to please the other person, where narcissists really kind of expose that and take advantage of that. And you may have found yourself in these types of relationships before. First of all, yes, they're both in cluster B, and so they do share some components, right? Lower self-esteem, trauma, but the huge differences here is that borderlines tend to seek therapy. Borderlines tend to inflict harm on themselves, where narcissists will inflict harm on someone else. Borderlines will admit their faults. Narcissists, if you've ever had a real apology from a narcissist, then you've seen a unicorn. It's not really common. So they are very different. And so, I don't know why they get lumped together. I think it's easy. It's just like a pile-on, but they are definitely not the same. Let's go to the final, and I think the most dangerous myth of borderline. Borderlines are criminal. They are murderous. You should avoid them. They are dangerous. Well, that's a hard one, right? I certainly don't want to be thought of as dangerous or harmful or murderous. People with personality disorders are a part of a population, and a population goes to prison, a part of a population goes to jail, a part of a population indulges in criminal activity. However, you also see that in doctor professions. You see that in lawyering professions, military, all kinds of professions. The NIH did a study of about 100 inmates, and they diagnosed 50 of them with a personality disorder. And those 3 personality disorders were narcissism, antisocial, and paranoid. So again, the types of personality disorders that don't have a lot of remorse, or known to not have a lot of remorse, that again seek transactions, they don't care about rule breaking, they go for what they want. Only 8% of them had BPD. Okay, so let's just break that down. 50% had a personality disorder. Okay, well, 50% didn't. Right? So what about those other 50%? Right? I watch a lot of true crime and a lot of documentaries, and oh, Jodi Arias, she had BPD, and this killer, she had BPD, blah blah blah. Okay, well, half of them didn't, right? And the other thing here is that women often seek out professional help and get diagnoses where men tend to not. So already you're going to see a higher diagnosis of women being overrepresented just in having the diagnosis in general. So sure, we are represented, you know, in a criminal population, of course, but don't forget that 50% are not. So knowing these myths and knowing that you can easily look for this information on the internet and dispel some of these myths, why do these myths perpetuate? Well, first, number one, haters gonna hate, right? There's so much ignorance out there. I mean, I just in reading some of these articles to do some, including one from the NIH, it was a study about BPD and criminality, and it started to talk about a movie from 1993, I think. It's called Single White Female. It's a great movie from the 90s. And they were like, and the main character, Hedra, and I'm like, no, the character's name was Hetty, right? So as soon as I saw like this incorrection, I was like, okay, I can't give any more credence to this study because you've already gotten this name wrong, and I'm not even halfway through the abstract. So there's so much misinformation, and so especially when you get on a format like Reddit or social media sharing site, it's so easy to click, send, click, go viral. And so myths perpetuate, right? The second reason is that people are angry, especially some of these people that go on Quora or Reddit, right? Like they read these, you know, people like, oh, my girlfriend, I'm speaking from experience. You know, you see a lot of doctor diagnoses, you know, like, I'm speaking from experience. She sounds like she has borderline. Really? Okay, well, why don't you go ahead and name the 10 DSM for me? I'll wait. Right? If you just ask them one more question or push them a little further, their whole house of cards falls down. And that leads into this third thing where people are ignorant. They latch on to something. I mean, I can't tell you like how many times I've heard like really, like just the pandemic, people are like, oh, it's a hoax. And I'm like, okay, well, I hope you find your way back to your spaceship. Say hi to Elvis for me. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like, it's ignorance, right? People are not educated. They're not educated on a ton of subjects. And so, of course, they probably aren't going to be very educated about mental illness. And the fourth thing here is deflection. And especially this comes out of the types of people that may be saying, oh, I speak from experience, my girlfriend, you know, oh, this sounds like something that I read in a book, right? Often, and especially after a breakup, nobody wants to take responsibility for what they might have done in a breakup or like, you know, a business deal gone wrong. And so they deflect. So those are usually why myths perpetuate. Now let's talk about what you can do to combat these myths. Well, to combat these myths, the first thing is just to come at people with cold, hard, unemotional facts. Go for facts and support those facts with data that is from the sources that I mentioned earlier. So studies, books, you know, peer-reviewed materials, government websites, mental health sites, NIH, NAMI, SAMHSA, all of these other sites, right? When I see somebody write something like this, like I'll be reading a news article and they're like, oh, sounds like they have borderline. I'll be like, really? I'll be like, where did you get your medical degree? You know, tell me more about the criteria. And, you know, maybe 30-40% of people will upvote my comment and like the rest will downvote. But I'm getting my voice out there, right? And so I come out that I'm like, really? That's not true. That's not true. I call bullshit. And this is just how I respond. I do this in conversations. I do this on website forums. I do this with YouTube comments. I do this in replying to other people's comments on social media sites. You have to come back at them, because if you stay silent, right, then that lets that myth perpetuate. Get your voice out there. That's what I'm saying. Get your voice out there. And of course, you don't want to out yourself perhaps because you have BPD and now someone else knows, but get your voice out there. My name is Jen. You've been watching BPD Woman. Please like, share, subscribe, comment below. And until I see you next time in everything you do, please be effective. Bye.